to say that I was asked to take advantage of a good opportunity, and we brought Kol Peterson here to talk to us about accessory dwelling units. I'm not going to do most of the introduction. I'm going to ask Dan Curry. If you don't know Dan, some of you don't know Dan. Dan worked at the city for 30-some years, and he hired me to come to work for the city of Greensboro 30 and a half years ago. So blame him. It's all his fault. But he has always been progressive and looking at new ideas in different ways, and we have just been talking literally about, well, what do we do with accessory dwelling units, and why don't we get more people who are interested in doing this in Greensboro? And what about Katrina cottages that are just pull in and drop them in place and there you go? And why wouldn't people take advantage of that? And Dan brought me the idea of bringing Kol here to talk to you about that very thing. And we had some money in the speaker series, so we brought him. And so he's been busy. He's been with UNCG students. We worked with city staff this afternoon. And now with you guys, and you're back with UNCG students tomorrow?
Yep, sure are.
So I'm going to turn this over. So we've gotten a lot of bang for our buck, so we appreciate it. I'm going to turn this over to Dan.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sue. Evening, everybody. Good crowd. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really pleased to introduce an incredible speaker this evening. But before I do, a couple of introductions. I know we saw a couple city council members come into the room, and now I don't even know where they are. Okay. We have District 4, Nancy Hoffman's here. Thank you so much. And District 5, Tammy Thurm. So appreciate you coming. To do anything around a new concept, it takes a lot of leadership. And so part of that leadership will certainly come from the city of Greensboro. So we're glad you're here to hear firsthand some of the good points and difficulties and challenges around bringing accessory dwelling units into Greensboro as kind of a new housing type. As Sue said, I've been working a little bit with UNCG's Center for Community Engaged Design, and Travis Hicks and I, Travis is the director over there, we were sitting around with a couple of their students in early January talking about accessory dwelling units and how could we engage Greensboro in this conversation. And lo and behold, about that same day, I get this notice on my computer that this book is coming out on this very subject. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll jot that down. Hadn't even hit the street yet. So I looked it up, and sure enough, Kol Peterson was about ready to publish a book, and it is now right here, and it's in the lobby, and I strongly encourage you, if you have any interest in this concept whatsoever, the book I think is $25 or $20, depending on which copy you get out there. There's also an online version if you're interested in that. It really is an incredibly informative piece of work. It kind of sets the whole stage for what we think is going to be a new movement in some parts of the country, as you'll hear tonight. It is an incredible movement to develop affordable, smaller homes on single-family properties. So you're going to hear quite a bit about that this evening. Tell you a little bit about Kol. Back in my day, there were these folks kind of called Renaissance people, and as I learned more about Kol, he's kind of one of them. He lives in Portland, or in the Portland area, and for the last 10 years or so, he's been giving classes to property owners, realtors, anyone that was interested in the concept. And he's taught literally thousands of folks in Portland how to basically put a accessory dwelling unit on the ground. Portland is the #1 place in this country for development of this style of housing. Kol has he's a writer. Obviously, he wrote a book. He also edits several social media sites. His degree was in environmental planning, a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. He's developed the first tiny house hotel in the world, the Caravan. And let's see, did I mention he actually designed, built, and lives in an accessory dwelling unit himself? He obviously is well vested in the subject matter. So we're going to have a really great time listening tonight, but we didn't ask you to come here just to listen. So here's your assignment. We need feedback. We need questions. If you want to ask how this might apply to your own property, please ask. We're going to have at least 30 minutes after Kol's presentation. If you have suggestions for how we might take this message out to the community and start to share this concept with others, please tell us that. If you think this is just a bunch of hooey and will never work in Greensboro, tell us that. Tell us why. I mean, we need to know what you know about the community and how you think the community will react to this concept, all right? Because it is kind of new. It hasn't been talked about a lot here in Greensboro. So please prepare some questions. I know a lot of you in the audience, so don't make me call names, but I will if I have to. So without any further ado, I'd like to have you give a warm welcome to Greensboro, to Kol Peterson.
Thanks, man. And thank you so much for coming out tonight to learn about ADUs a little bit more. So I'm gonna introduce myself a little bit more, just to provide a little bit of context for why I'm interested in this topic, and then we're gonna launch into it. And so I built an ADU in 2010 in Northeast Portland and moved into it. And the reason that I built one was because I was looking for a financially sustainable form of housing for myself. So I built the ADU, I bought the property, built the ADU, moved into the ADU, and started renting out the primary house. And as a result of this, I immediately was in a situation where I no longer had any housing expenses for the rest of my life. That's a pretty remarkable thing that you can do with an accessory dwelling unit that you cannot do with any other form of housing. So if you have a single family property and you wanted to do that, you could do that right now, potentially. And it is a life-changing experience. So that's all, what I did. And I became so passionate about the process that I started teaching a class for homeowners after completing mine. I've been teaching that class like every month or so for people who live in the city of Portland primarily. And it's an 8-hour class. It's really thorough and it walks through the whole process. I've been teaching that class for like 7 years now. Taught this class to about 2,000 people. And I've also been teaching a class for realtors now to get realtors knowledgeable about ADUs as well, because now the number one question that homeowners have is, can I build an ADU on this property when they want to buy a property? It's a very hot kind of idea now in Portland because it makes such financial sense for homeowners to build an ADU on the property. So it's definitely been a transformative form of housing in the Portland market. And anyway, so let's see. So in 2013, I opened up the Caravan, the Tiny House Hotel. We'll talk about tiny houses in a minute. And then through Caravan, I started running the citywide ADU tour, which was a tour to help showcase what ADUs look like for people like yourselves who wanted to potentially build one on the property. Speaking of which, who here is potentially interested in building an ADU on their property? Please raise your hand. Okay, so like 10, 15 people. And that tour was an opportunity for people to see ADUs firsthand, because who would invest $100,000 plus into something that they've never seen before, and then also to connect homeowners with builders and designers of ADUs. And so we've run that tour 5 times, and about 1,000 people come to each tour, so it's a really popular tour. We get people from all over the country, so next time we have it, you should come on out to Portland. It'll be spring of 2019. If you're really interested in ADUs, it's a great opportunity to see a whole bunch in person. We'll have either 12 if we do one day, or 24 if we do a 2-day tour. And then I started doing consultations for homeowners who wanted to build an ADU on their property, to kind of walk through the financing, the cost, the zoning aspects, the small space design aspects, legality aspects, and a whole bunch of just the step-by-step process of building an ADU. And then I started writing this book like 2 years ago, and finally completed the book. And now I'm kind of taking everything that I've learned as an advocate, educator, consultant, policy wonk person, and kind of trying to help other cities improve their ADU codes. Because most cities, Greensboro not excluded, don't have great ADU codes. So there's definitely a lot of work to do on a policy level to get codes to be good enough that people will want to build ADUs on their property. So without further ado, since there aren't that many ADUs in Greensboro yet, I'm sure most people here, who here currently has an ADU? One person. And who here has been inside a legal permitted accessory dwelling unit, as far as I know? 2 people, 3 people. So that's why we're going to spend the beginning of the presentation just showing you some examples of what these things look like, because I think it's really important to understand what these things actually look like in real life. So this is an accessory dwelling unit, and I usually like to start by just saying these are not accessory dwelling units. You've probably heard about tiny houses on wheels, tiny homes, tiny houses. And these things are all over the media. There's 5 HD TV shows about them, so I'm sure you've heard about tiny houses on wheels. Generally speaking, tiny houses on wheels aren't legal to live in residential properties anywhere in the United States. So despite the fact there's 5 HD TV shows, you can't live in these legally. Are people living these on their residential properties? Yes, but not in great abundance and not legally. So, so I'm a fan of these, and this is my hotel, and so people can stay here overnight. This was the first legal permitted application of tiny houses on wheels, but it's basically because it's used as like an RV park. And so that's how we were able to kind of take advantage of the zoning to facilitate people actually being able to experiment with kicking the tires on tiny house living. So I'm a fan of tiny houses, but because A, they're not legal to live in, and B, they're very small. They're like 100 to 200 square feet. Not a lot of people are going to want to realistically live in them because we're not accustomed to living in spaces quite that small yet. The biggest difference, the way that you can know that it's not an accessory dwelling unit and it's tiny house on wheels, is the wheels. If it has wheels, it's not an ADU. This is the kind of the quintessential slide that summarizes some interesting facets of ADUs. Number one, okay, so the family living in this household on the left, the yellow house is the primary, or the house in which they live. The green house is the house from which they are deriving rental income. So in 2010, they're living in the primary house, and they have a baby, and then their baby becomes 2 babies, and they become a family with visitors and out-of-town guests, and they move out of both the accessory dwelling unit and the primary house in 2020. And then 2040, they become empty nesters. Kids go off to school. They move into the accessory dwelling unit and start renting out the primary house for rental income. So this summarizes some interesting facets of ADUs. So number one, the primary motivation behind why people want to build ADUs, according to a 2013 survey that was done of accessory dwelling units in Portland, the first statistically valid study of permanent ADUs anywhere in the United States. The number one motivation behind why people want to build them is passive rental income potential, like myself. The second most common motivation is flexible living space for multi-generational households. And the third interesting facet of ADUs, noted, as exemplified by this slide, is that it's a homeowner who's living on their property for 30 years. Now, the average homeowner owns their property in the United States for like 5 to 7 years. So this, by contrast, this family is living on this property for 30 years. Now, we don't know for a fact that people who own ADUs are going to live on their property for 30 years. But interestingly, we do know a couple things about ADUs. They don't add as much value to your property as they cost to build, which might sound like a bad thing. But the reality is those who are building ADUs are not professional developers. They're not people who are buying a property speculatively, adding an accessory dwelling unit and trying to flip the property. That's not the average developer of ADUs. Rather, it's people who have long-term vested interest in the property who are going to be renting out one unit or the other for a long period of time, because then ADUs do make financial sense. after a certain number of years, depending on how expensive the ADU is and what the rental income potential is for that ADU, they do pencil out. In fact, they pencil out incredibly well. So, so homeowners, so it's people who have long-term vested interest in the property who are going to be interested in building an ADU. But also because you have this secondary unit that's a small space, it is providing kind of a flexible housing format on your property, which means that while your primary house might no longer make sense for you at age 70, and you're living alone, or you're living with one other person, maybe the ADU does. So all of a sudden it kind of bakes into the property this incredible amount of flexibility over time. And so interestingly, it's not just over like the decades that ADUs play different functions, it's over the course of a year. ADUs tend to play a variety of different functions. It's a really flexible housing format. So it's not uncommon. In fact, I'd say it's fairly common for an ADU to be a long-term rental housing, a short-term rental housing, a guest house, and an office, all in the course of 1 year. So ADUs tend to be really flexible housing formats. So that's kind of, I bet you, for those who are interested in building an ADU, I've probably just expressed some of your interest in building an ADU. I'm kind of positive that I have, because those are the motivations why people are doing it. So these are some examples of accessory dwelling units we have here. In the upper left, a detached backyard cottage-style ADU. Up here we have an ADU connected to a workshop or a garage. Or I should say, this is a workshop, but it could be an ADU attached to a garage. That would be totally fine. This is an accessory dwelling unit that's bumped out from the primary house. So we call it a bump-out ADU or an attached ADU or in addition to ADU conversion. And then this is a garage conversion ADU. All acceptable forms of ADUs in terms of the different structural forms in which the function of an accessory dwelling unit can be housed. An accessory dwelling unit, the definition is a secondary housing unit on a single-family lot. A housing unit is a place that has its own sleeping, dining, sanitation space, but it's independent from the primary house. So these are all different structural forms in which an ADU can be housed. So this is an ADU in a lovely city I've been visiting called Greensboro. I just got this picture about 5 minutes ago from somebody. So they exist here, just not in great abundance, but this is one on a property in Greensboro. So I'm going to show some, just to kind of normalize this housing format. I'm going to just breeze through a whole bunch of pictures really quickly here so you can get a sense of what they look like. And one of the challenges of ADUs is that they are usually kind of on tight pieces of property, meaning it's hard to get both an image of the ADU itself and show the house unless you have like a really good wide angle lens, because you're like in urban infill and can't get far enough back from the accessory dwelling unit to capture both. But I tried to do that in these images, so forgive me about the weird sound back there, that feedback. But I'll stand on this side. So, so as you look at these pictures, kind of look at both the ADU but also the relationship to the primary house. So this is a backyard detached. These are all backyard detached ADUs here. The primary house in this case is like up on this side of the property. This is a ADU mother-in-law or aging mother lives there. This is a ADU in the back, primary house in the front, so this is taken from the back of the property. Basement conversion ADU, so this is like a basement in a house that's been converted to an accessory dwelling unit. Another one. This is a carve-out ADU or an internal ADU, so this is, the ADU itself is actually this portion of the house. They've just taken a single-family house and put in, the requisite utility separation, firewall separation, and its own kitchen, and it's an independent unit. From the outside, it doesn't look like anything different except that there's a separate entrance here now and a secondary meter, so it's kind of the only visual cue, but there's a home and housing unit that's been created. Bump out ADU addition. This is another ADU. This one's like impossible to get the whole house in there, but the house starts right here and goes that way. So just hold back back half is the ADU. That's a 3-generation household of a grandmother, mother, and daughter living in this house. So this is a interesting hybrid thing where it was a family that lives in this house. They built an addition. They wanted to enable themselves to convert it to an accessory dwelling unit in the future. So they built it with all the requisite kind of planning in mind to do so, but didn't actually go through the full formal process to legally convert to an ADU yet, but they will. This is a garage conversion ADU, so we're going to show a few garage conversion ADUs. This used to be just a standard driveway. They put in this really expensive sliding door and created this really funky, modern accessory dwelling. This one was featured in the New York Times like 5 years ago. Another garage conversion ADU, pretty much more simple one. Another one. Another one. This is a really cheap one. This one is $40,000. This is really cheap for ADUs. ADUs above a garage. ADU above a workshop. ADU attached to a workshop. So this is ADU from here to here, workshop in the front. Modern looking ADUs. And that's it. So those are some examples of different ADUs. I just wanted to kind of show you what they look like. They're just small homes, basically. There's nothing, from a building perspective, there's nothing really special about ADUs compared to a stick frame standard house. You don't need a special builder to build an ADU. The design is a little bit more challenging, I'd say, than a normal single-family house, which is counterintuitive because a single-family house is bigger, but that is precisely what makes an ADU more challenging to design. Because you have to pack in all the functionality of the house into a space that's like 1/3 the size of a normal house. And then you're furthermore dealt with all these design or zoning limitations that we'll kind of briefly touch on, but things like setback requirements and additional parking requirements, etc. So I'm going to go into some of the interesting policy aspects of ADUs now. So in 1940, the average household size, number of people living in a house, was 3.6. In 2014, the average household size was like more like 2.6 or 2.55 or so. So it's been steadily shrinking, and this has been a trend that nobody would really pick up on. It's kind of subtle, that numeric drop. But why is this happening? Well, this is happening because for obvious reasons, like where there's fewer people having large families, like that's kind of obvious. But there's a whole lot of other reasons. Like for example, for those who do have families, they're waiting longer in life to have families. Therefore, they're spending more of their adult life in a 1 or 2 person household. People are living longer, so proportionally as a portion of their life, even if they have kids, a greater portion of their life, they're living in a 1 or 2 person household. People are having fewer kids, period. People are opting not to have kids, like me. There's a huge number of households that are being created out of the baby boomer generation that are 1 and 2 person households. So there's just like all these different factors, more divorces, and more single parent households. Like there's all these factors that are playing into this figure. But basically, this is a really important thing for planning and zoning staff to like start to think about, because all of a sudden this housing stock that we've all been living in since 1950 no longer really makes sense for the kind of demographic we have in the U.S. So, and it's pretty extreme, that mismatch. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So let's dive into the 1 person households for a minute. So in one person households in these cities, look at the amount of households that those 1 person households represent. I mean, it's a pretty striking amount of households that are just 1 person, let alone 1 and 2 person households. Now, we're going to go to the average single family home size. 1950, the average home size was roughly 900 square feet. Average home size in 2015 was roughly 2,600 square feet. So we went through this dramatic increasing of our home size over that same time span. So you take those 2 variables and you crosswalk them, and you end up with something even more profound, and we'll show you that in a second. But this is what this looks like if you're looking at the swath of the demographic that are nuclear families right now, it's about a quarter of households are nuclear families, and about 3/4 of our housing stock are this kind of home, a single-family house with 3 bedrooms, 4-bedroom homes. So way more of those single-family homes than really are merited based on the number of households that are represented by nuclear family households. Meanwhile, the 1- and 2-person households are the suckers because this is all that's available to them right there. This is the only kind of housing that's available for 1- and 2-person households. It's really designed for 1- and 2-person households. And it's possible, just possible, that not every single 1- and 2-person household wants to live in a multifamily apartment building, right? I'm a 1- and 2-person household. I don't want to live in a single-family house. But I'm sure a lot of you do. So, so up till now, there really hasn't been many opportunities other than either buying a home that's way more expensive than what we want, way more space than we need, way more heating and cooling costs, way more cleaning costs, way more maintenance costs, all these additional costs and expenses and burden and stress that we don't even want, but that's all that's available to us. Or we can live in a multifamily apartment building. So, so that's kind of like the weird dynamic that's going on. But worse than that is this trend right here, which is that our average residential footprint per capita in 1950 was 292 square feet in 1950, and it's 1,023 square feet now. So why is this so bad? Well, from an environmental perspective, which is my motivation for all this stuff, I was an environmental studies major, environmental planning in grad school. This is all I've done my whole life. I worked at the EPA for a number of years. It turns out that the single most effective way to reduce your greenhouse, like your environmental footprint, environmental footprint overall, period, is living in a smaller residential footprint. So any advancements we're making with regard to better building practices in terms of weatherization, green building technology, solar panels, insulation, weatherizing, et cetera, are totally irrelevant compared to this one fact, that we are completely blowing our energy budget by vastly increasing our residential footprint because of these housing trends. So when you look at all these different green building practices, such as straw bale homes or multifamily construction or recycled homes or SIP panel construction, these all reduce energy use, greenhouse gas use over the course of the life cycle of the building, but simply building small is by far the most effective way to reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of a home over the course of its life, meaning the construction and the habitation and the deconstruction of the building. But most importantly in that life cycle is the habitation of the building. The biggest kind of energy hog of our lives is our heating and cooling within our homes. So in order to keep a house conditioned, it needs to be heated or cooled most of the time. And so depending on what your climate is, like here, you're both heating and cooling depending on the time of the year. Both of those things require a lot of energy. And so in the course of a year, an average size home will use this much energy. And if you build that home efficiently with really good green building practices, lots of insulation, lots of air sealing, it'll use this much energy, and that's a great thing. But if you simply reduce the size of the house to the largest possible ADU you can build in Portland anyway, roughly 800 square feet, which is roughly what your code would allow here too in most cases, that home that's small will necessarily use less energy than that super efficient larger home. So it's the most effective green building strategy without trying to be at all. It's just inherently really green over the course of a year because of the heating and cooling costs. If you build that home with really good insulation and air sealing, it'll reduce the emissions even further. So I should just note, though, that at this point, if this should be thought of on a per capita basis. So if there's 5 people living in this house, then they'll use less energy than one person living in an ADU of that size. Does that make sense? So if, in fact, there were 5 people living in our 2,200 square foot homes, I wouldn't be so interested in ADUs. But the reality is, there's 1- and 2-person households, occupying those 2,200 square foot homes because most of us don't want to like share our kitchens and bathrooms with strangers or whatever. And because of those like social, cultural habits, that's part of this equation. So ADUs are kind of organically filling this demand for, or need for, this demographic demand for which there is a huge need at this point, and will be for the rest of our lives. So, meanwhile, if you look at the housing stock in the United States, the majority of housing that is available in the United States are single-family homes across most cities in the United States, even major metropolitan areas, surprisingly, with the exception of like Manhattan and San Francisco and Chicago. Almost every other city is dominated by single-family residential housing. Any city up and down, from I'd say south of DC down to maybe Miami, any city in between is going to be mostly single-family residential. And so single-family residential is where you can build ADUs. So if you look at other issues that are kind of percolating at this point, housing affordability is a big issue in a lot of cities. I don't know that this is actually a big issue in Greensboro necessarily, but certainly in a lot of cities, this is becoming a really big topic. Is housing costs are going way up rapidly because of these demands of population growth and more 1 and 2 person households. Even if you didn't have population growth, you'd have more 1 and 2 person households, more need for more small housing units, but no change in the housing supply. So as a result, we're seeing these radical spikes in the number of people who are rent burdened in all these cities. And that trend isn't going to change anytime soon. At this point, there's a number of things that are happening that so people are starting to figure out ways to create affordable housing solutions for themselves with or without good ADU codes. This is an example of an informal ADU and a non-permanent ADU. And these exist here in Greensboro, and they exist all over the country. And you might not even think about them that way, but they do exist in many locations. And that the fact that they are so dominant in so many places is a really good indicator of the need for this form of housing. The fact that they're not permitted simply indicates that there's regulatory barriers for people to create legal permitted versions of these accessory dwelling units. So why are people building unpermitted ADUs? Well, it's simpler to do so, it's cheaper to do so, there's no property tax increases when you create informal ADUs or illegal ADUs or unpermitted ADUs. It's notable for communities that are thinking about potentially adding more legal permitted ADUs to their city. One of the notable things I want to express to you is that the presence of permitted ADUs have very little impact in terms of the neighborhood character, in terms of the parking impacts on your neighborhood. And I know that because to the extent that those impacts exist, they already exist. You already have those impacts because of all the informal ADUs that already exist in your neighborhoods. So the number of permitted ADUs will probably never touch the number of unpermitted ADUs that already exist. So it's really nothing to fear about permitted ADUs. Rather, inducing more permitted ADUs in any given community will only help to provide more safe housing options for people who would be living in those ADUs. So these numbers aren't going to be totally relevant here, but I just wanted, when I'm talking about why people build ADUs, it's oftentimes because of the passive rental income, and so if you take the cost of an ADU divided by the amount of rental income you can get from a month. Somebody who's living in the primary house renting out the ADU, it might pay for itself in 8.9 years. Somebody who's living in that same property, developing the same ADU but living in the ADU, renting out the primary house, it would pay for itself in 5.3 years. And then somebody who's renting out both the ADU and the primary house would make it in 3.3 years, but they would be homeless. So that would be a bummer for them. But actually, you can't do that here because there's an owner-occupancy requirement, so you can't do that anyway. But the break-even is not bad. In fact, it's really good. So if you're going to be holding onto your property for X number of years, like 10 years, the ADU will effectively pay for itself. And then after that, it's just kind of cash flow, it's just money in the bank. So ADUs are expensive. So even if the regulations are perfect in a given jurisdiction, it's still really challenging for homeowners to figure out how to build them because they're really expensive. I don't care where you are in the country, it's going to be expensive to build it. And so right now there isn't really good institutional financing options for homeowners, so you can't easily borrow money from the bank to build them. There's ways to do it, but it's not easy. So realistically, people are using a patchwork of different funding options, cash savings, home equity lines of credit, which is like borrowing money against the value of your house if your home values have appreciated since you purchased it, personal loans from family or friends, credit cards, cash at refi, and you have loans are also used once in a while. But so it's usually a patchwork of different funding mechanisms that people are using to pay for these things. Portland had a good, about 30 per year being developed till 2010, which is roughly the rate of ADU development that we're seeing in most cities. For a city of our size, there's like 600,000 people. So for a city of our size, this is about average. It wasn't really till 2010 that ADU started to become a really popular housing form, which is exactly when I built mine. And there's a few reasons behind that. It was mostly because the city put into effect this thing called the System Development Charge Waiver, which I refer to here in shorthand as the SDC waiver. And the SDC waiver dropped this $10,000 fee that you would have to pay to add this form of housing to your property. And that kind of sparked this really strong interest. That's also when I started teaching the homeowner class and kind of started doing the education advocacy things around Portland that helped to raise awareness, things like this. But importantly, I should mention that all of our regulations were, by this time, were really good. Like, we had really good regulations, but they still weren't being developed. So there's, this won't happen in most jurisdictions unless A, the regulations are really good, and B, there's kind of a housing crisis. And Portland was facing a housing crisis, meaning there was just rapidly escalating home values, lack of good rental options, really low vacancy rates, and things like that. So those factors were really driving a really acute need for more housing. And so it was either this or this curve would happen, or this curve would happen through the form of tiny houses on wheels or internal ADUs. One way or the other, this housing was going to be created. So we started running a citywide ADU tour around 2012 and showcasing ADUs across the city. So this is 1 year, 24 different ADUs that were on the tour. And now Portland's kind of taking it to the next level. We're still kind of seeing that the majority of our land is dominated by single-family zoning. We still have the same housing crisis. ADUs haven't solved it by any stretch. We've only had 1,800 built, and that represents like 1% of our total housing stock. So it's not like it's the panacea of creating all the additional housing that we need. So Portland is now looking at potentially allowing for 2 accessory dwelling units on a property. This would be the first time any city in the United States has done this. The only other city that's done this in North America is Vancouver, British Columbia, which is the only city with more ADUs than Portland. Vancouver is kind of known as being the most progressive city in maybe the world with ADUs anyway. And so they allow 1 basement ADU and 1 detached ADU, or they refer to them as a laneway house. And so Portland is kind of following in Vancouver's footsteps here by proposing this, and it's very contentious. There's people who don't want it, there's people who do want it. And the city's kind of walking a fine line and probably going to go forward with it. So this will happen this summer, if it happens, and if the city council votes on it, and we'll see how it goes. But it's basically addressing the same problem statement. It's still in recognition of the fact that there is a huge demand for 1- and 2-person housing and a huge oversupply of single-family residential zoned properties. And this is just taking that ADU concept one step further and saying, you know what, let's allow for 2 ADUs on property, because what else can you do? And indeed, there is a huge amount of interest in building ADUs. So if you look, there was a survey done by this same study for the residential infill project. And in that survey, they asked, among other things, what people want to do in their property within the next 5 years. And 13 people said they wanted to build, 30% of people said they wanted to build an ADU for friends and family. 10.9% said they wanted to build an ADU for rental income. There was like 7,000 people responding to the survey, so it's like a very large sample size. So it's a very large number of people who are interested in building this housing form. Will all these people build ADUs? No, because it's really expensive and it's really challenging and it's really hard. It's really stressful. It's not a small project at all. So even if the regulations are absolutely perfect, it's still, out of these, 13.5% of people who want to build it, maybe 2% will, 3%. But that still is, in a large city, going to result in a lot of ADUs. So right now, Portland has 1,800 permitted ADUs, and there's 800 more in the pipeline. So there's, roughly 2,600 or so ADUs that will have been built by the time all the ones that are in the pipeline have been completed. It takes about 6 months or so to construct an ADU in general, sometimes up to a year. So, what does it take for an ADU movement to take off in a given city? Well, there needs to be an affordable rental housing crisis, and high land value is not a good thing, but that tends to be an indicator that there is going to be a need for ADUs. Predominance of single families in residential zoning. Greensboro certainly has that. And as evidenced by the fact that I'm standing here today, you can say that there's political leadership, because it's going to take some changes to the code to make ADUs take off. And then there needs to be reasonable zoning and flexible development regulations, the poison pill regulations, which I can go into if people are interested. Faith in government. It's homeowners who are building ADUs, not professional developers, so homeowners have never developed a housing unit before. It's a complicated, expensive, risky feeling endeavor. And therefore, you kind of need to have a sense of trust that you're going to go through the process and not get hammered by the city when you're doing it. And that's best exemplified by going into the permitting office and getting, really reasonable responses to your questions. And then lastly, as a homeowner, you need to have access to the capital to build this ADU if you're going to be able to build it. So that typically is people are accessing the capital they need by being able to refinance their primary house or take out a home equity line of credit. That's really the most common way, because they're so expensive and it's hard to have enough capital otherwise. I should say that, we know that people who build ADUs are building them partially for rental income potential, and it's generally going to be, it's kind of like people who build ADUs probably don't have oodles of money, because that's their motivation for doing it. And if they had oodles of money, they would probably not be building an ADU, because it's not the easiest way to make money. It's like you could make money more easily if you had a lot of money by putting it in a hedge fund or something. So it's kind of like a middle class form of housing development. You also can't be really poor and develop an ADU because they're not cheap. So it's kind of like meeting this. It's only a certain swath of the demographic that would reasonably both have the motivation to build an ADU and have sufficient capital to do so. As I mentioned, ADUs are pretty robust field. There's a lot of questions still to be answered about them. I, in the course of teaching my class, like 50 times or more now, I've heard all the questions that people have, or a lot of the questions, and managed to kind of figure out how to codify all that into this book. And so the first part of this book, it's a 358-page book. The first part is for homeowners who want to build an ADU on their property. The second part is for community advocates and city planners who want to update their code to see more ADUs being built. And so it kind of offers a prescription for how to improve the code, not just what the code specifically needs to do, but also how to get there, because it's a really politically challenging thing to update an ADU code, because there's always a lot of neighborhood citizen pushback against the fear of the parking impacts and the fear of the change of the single-family neighborhood character and the fear that it'll undermine property values, none of which have any statistical basis or any evidence whatsoever, but they are always come up as issues that people fear in communities. So this book is an attempt to both codify how to build an ADU on your property as well as how to help your community get more ADUs built. But the last chapter is how to build an informal ADU, because for better or worse, a lot of cities won't have good codes for a long time. So I wanted to put in writing how the best practices for informal ADU development, if you're going to have to go that way. But that's not, an optimal way to go. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and happy to kind of take some questions. And we got 2 mics, and why don't Dan, maybe you can pass this around to people, and I'll stand at that mic.
Okay, all right. Okay, folks, right here.
This mic isn't
Hello?
turned on.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay.
I can't. I don't know if anybody else can.
Oh, there we go.
We can hear you.
Check. Yeah.
We can hear you without the mic.
All right, I'll just talk loudly. Go ahead.
So Stu Schwartz probably has a better handle on this than I do. But I would guess that 60 or 75% of the houses in single-family residential zoning in Greensboro also are controlled by restrictive covenants.
Yeah.
What do you do about those?
You don't build ADUs there, unfortunately. So across the board, across the country, almost without exception, you can't build an accessory dwelling unit on a property with an HOA. So,
No, not homeowner association.
sorry, if you have a CCNR, that,
Not a CCNR.
Oh.
In Greensboro, and in much of North Carolina, it was done by a restrictive covenant that the builder put on the lot, saying that it was limited to single-family use.
yeah. So that, I guess I would put that into the same category of CCNR. So if that CCNR, if that covenant is part of the deed of the property, you can't remove it, then you're kind of screwed. I don't see any way, except, you can do an informal ADU. I don't see how unless there's a legal process for removing the covenant, you won't be able to build an ADU there. So my advice would be look for another property where it doesn't have that covenant.
So for Greensboro to adopt a zoning ordinance allowing this, they'll have to be careful and have their staff trained to tell people who are getting ready to build it.
It's really 70% of the properties have that?
I would guess. I don't know. That's why I said Sue would know.
Okay. Well, that would be a huge red flag, certainly, yeah. If that were true, that would be a red flag for sure. Although there might be a legal process for updating that.
Is Sue here?
I think she had to take off.
Okay.
Did somebody else want to respond to that?
I'm a real estate broker with Gallagher Realtors, and I don't have that particular stat in front of me, but that's actually kind of high. I don't think that's correct.
Yeah. So anyway, it would be a red flag, yeah, for sure.
I can say it's not something the city would enforce once the word goes.
Why don't you say that to the mic?
Sounds bad when you say it to the mic, the city doesn't enforce those types of private covenants or restrictions or anything. It would be through the homeowners association or the original builder. We do have an accessory dwelling code unit code on the books. They are permitted. We may tweak it a bit, but it is currently permitted in the ordinance.
Yeah, I have a question for you. North Carolina is known for large lots. I'm from Michigan originally, and smaller lots. Here I find pretty big lots. Even city lots are pretty big, which definitely adapts itself for these ADUs. My question is this. You go to sewer, water taps, and into your electrical, I guess I'm saying in Portland, what did they do there? Did they drop, did the sewer taps go attached to the house, the existing structure? Or did you have a separate tap to the road or
Yeah, so-
other taps? Or how do you do taps?
Yeah, so in Portland, and this is kind of the best practice, you would extend the sewer from the primary house to the accessory dwelling unit. You extend this from the water from the primary house to the accessory dwelling unit. So no new work in the right of way, no work in the sidewalk, no work in the street. If you did have to do work in the street, it would be $20,000 to add a sewer. It would be $10,000 for a water line. So you don't want that. He's saying a lot more. Yeah, so I mean, it's really expensive. You want to avoid that. Fortunately for you, Greensboro doesn't require that either. So Greensboro doesn't have that poison pill. If it did require that, like some jurisdictions do, I would have been listing that among the poison pills that would prevent ADU development. Electric and gas, the way that works is you have to upsize your electric service. It's not so much a municipal requirement as much as the utility / the electrician will say that you need certain amps. You might need, instead of a 200 amp service, you might need 325, and that'll cost you a couple $1,000 to upgrade your electrical service. And you might have to split it into 2 panels, or you will have to have a dedicated panel for the ADU. You may or may not have to have a dedicated meter for the ADU. And gas, same thing, 2 meters typically, but I don't know what the code is here in Greensboro about gas or electric.
Okay, and what about one more? Your sites where you got a septic or sewer, you're in your septic system, do you have to either put in a separate system or tap into the existing, add to it? What have you found in Portland that they do?
So we don't really, generally speaking, have septic within the city limits, but I have seen it, and they would just say, ensure that you have sufficient capacity, and then you would tap into it. Just treat the sewer the same way that you would your primary house.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned Portland has a maximum ADU of about 800 square feet.
Yeah.
What do you think's best practices on that, either limiting it as a percentage of the principal dwelling or an overall cap or minimum as well?
Yeah, I'd say no minimum is really needed, because there's no, it's not really a problem if people were to build a 100 square foot ADU. It's not really a problem, but I don't know nobody who ever will, because it's so expensive the fixed cost of development, housing development are such that it wouldn't really make sense financially to build a 100 square foot unit. So I don't think you really need a minimum size. That said, it's 300 square feet or whatever it is here isn't really a big problem, because most people tend to build them bigger anyway. The maximum size here is a problem, because it's capped at 30% of the size of the primary house, and that is not big enough. That's what Portland used to have. So that means that unless you're lucky enough, entitled enough to have a 2,000 square foot house, you can't really build an ADU. What about the people who have a 1,000 square foot house? They can't build one. What about people who have a 1,500 square foot house? They have to limit their ADU to 500 square feet. That's pretty limiting. So yeah, that's a major poison pill. So I think the best practice would be coming up with a standard that's probably equal across the board for every property that says you can build up to a certain size. What should that size be? Well, the way that I think about that is 400 square feet per capita. So if your jurisdiction decides they only want ADUs to be for one person, which is not a good idea, but if they decided that, you could limit an ADU to 450 square feet. I would say that if you really want ADUs to be a flexible housing type that's going to serve 1- and 2-person households, it should probably be around 800 square feet. 800 square feet seems to be a good number. California, though, went up to 1,200 square feet, which is really going to serve two adults and a kid, probably. So, if you really wanted ADUs for some social demographic reason to serve small families, if that was the goal, then I would say probably 1,200 square feet. But I think 800 square feet seems to serve 1- and 2-person households really well. So I would just make a fixed size, 800 square feet or smaller than the primary house is probably a good way to frame it, because ADUs must inherently be accessory to, ancillary to, smaller than the primary house by definition. So that seems to be a good working standard.
One follow-up question. Have you encountered a community that is allowed ADUs outside of residential properties? I'm over in Durham, and they're talking about, for example, put them in church parking lots or other places where there's felt to be surplus land.
So you might be thinking about like tiny homes on churches, which is kind of a new phenomenon that we're seeing for addressing homelessness. And that's, I'd say, a different topic, different discussion. They're not, that wouldn't be considered an accessory dwelling unit per se, legally speaking, or from a code perspective, though there are some, interpretations of ADUs that are, a little bit fringy. For example, San Francisco allows for you to add a secondary or another unit to a multifamily structure, and in the basement, you can convert your garage now, because they're trying to create, their housing prices are like $1.5 million. So they're trying to figure out any way to build more housing. And so they allow you to build an extra unit in your basement, even if it's a 4-plex or 5-plex, and they call those accessory dwelling units. But the true definition of an accessory dwelling unit is a secondary housing unit on a single-family lot. So generally speaking, I would put that in a different category as I would with any kind of construction, no other units on a commercial lot or a church lot or any other lot that isn't a single-family residential lot. But, I guess, different cities are obviously can use the term how they want. But if you look at across the board, generally speaking, we're talking about single-family residential zone properties, or at least properties that have a single-family residence on them, which could be commercially zoned, but they have opted not to take advantage of that use.
My question is, how are these units different than a traditionally developed neighborhood where you would have your garage in the back of an apartment on top? Is this different?
This is that, yeah. So these are traditional developments that you saw on the Fonz living in 1950 or 1960, whatever that was. So it's very traditional housing form. It's just that they were regulated out of existence between 1950 and like 19 now, pretty much. So they are
Because of
traditional.
zoning and code?
Yeah. So these were not uncommon back in the 1900s to 1940, but then they kind of disappeared.
So this is just really the recycling of that stuff?
Which is the name that we aptly titled this talk. It's a new old kind of housing form that's resurging now, but it's only resurging where cities are like, oh, we should really take advantage of this old idea because it's becoming important again.
Well, it's a great way to backfill all that space.
And notably, I just want to follow up on this. This is another point. If you're an advocate looking at ADUs, this is traditional development. This is traditional housing development that we've lost for a period, for the last generation, but it is traditional.
And so in the way that it's been handled in Portland, are all these ADUs still having the same address as the main unit? You're not getting into additional address numbers and things like
Yeah,
that?
it's the letter B added on. So it's a separate address, and it has to, any legal housing unit has to have its own dedicated address for emergency response. So if the fire truck comes, they know where to go.
Still have to be.
Lots of B's.
Hi, I live in a historic neighborhood right near the university, College Hill Historic District, and big supporter of a lot of this type of housing. I live in a renovated mill, but one concern that our neighborhood had was that a lot of the really old houses were divided up into 4 and 5 units. They all became rentals. It did impact the quality of life of surrounding homes. And I'm wondering if often ADUs are designated in such a way that the owner must live on site so that it doesn't become split up investor property, rental property that just basically slides down in value. And how are those things balanced, say, in Portland or in other areas? Because it's a great housing model, and I want to support it.
Yeah.
But I also live in a neighborhood where I see there really are some negatives to it if it gets out of hand or if it's not regulated well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really the key, is regulating it well. So the 4-plexes that are causing you consternation may not have been done legally. Maybe there really was a need for additional parking in that case, and they didn't provide it because they didn't do it legally, or maybe it wasn't required at the time, or maybe the house was constructed poorly, but I don't know what that instance is. But in general, ADUs, what are owner occupancy requirements, are very common. You have them here in Greensboro. And those were designed for exactly that, to address that fear. The problem is that anywhere in the country where there's owner-occupancy requirements, ADUs aren't being built. Nobody wants to build ADUs in general for a variety of reasons, as a result, in part because of owner-occupancy requirements, because you're basically undermining the economic flexibility and utility of the property by adding that deed restriction onto it. So you couldn't ever say, if you needed to pick up and move to Michigan, you wouldn't be able to, or you couldn't rent out the house legally, or a bank that may want to take over the loan might be afraid of doing that, because if they had to take over the loan, they couldn't do so legally, because they wouldn't be able to owner occupy, because they're a bank, or an LLC, a nonprofit, couldn't develop an ADU on their property because for affordable housing, because there's an owner occupancy requirement. And appraisers wouldn't know how to deal with this property, because all of a sudden there's this weird deed restriction on it. So for all these kind of weird subtle reasons, it undermines the value of the property and basically makes ADUs not be a rational investment, when you can instead simply build a 1,000 square foot addition to your house and certainly capture some money as a homeowner improving your property that way. So that right now would be the rational thing to do if you're a homeowner, add a 1,000 square foot addition. The only problem with that is it's going exactly the opposite of what we want to be doing from a social, environmental, economic perspective for our country, for our city, for our community. So there needs to be kind of a balance struck there. You know, your one example aside, I don't know that there is there's no example that I've heard of where not having an owner occupancy has been a problem with ADUs. So interestingly, you know, if you look at any housing form in the United States, all housing forms, single-family house, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, multifamily, none of them have owner occupancy requirements. But all of a sudden, for this one housing form, we need to have owner occupancy requirements? Like, why do we need to target this one housing form and not the duplex next door, not the triplex next door?
So is it maybe that the city could limit the number of divisions within a house that could keep it from kind of going into the deep end where it does negatively impact neighbors? And in other words, duplexes may be fine and doesn't have a big impact on the neighboring properties, but if the old house is divided into 5 different units, and none of which the owner lives in, and the condition of the house falls and all of those things, it's just kind of, you know.
I don't know if there's like a discrete, solid answer to that question.
Okay.
Yeah. But, you know, in my book, I spend about 20 pages talking about owner occupancy requirements because they are such a problem. From a very subtle perspective, the intuitive way, the way that most people superficially look at the code is, oh, good, this will preserve the property value, this will ensure that we have a good, you know, use of the property, but in practice, it kills ADUs. So, you know, you have to choose your battles and decide, do you want more 1,000 square foot additions, or do you want more ADUs?
Hi. My question is, outside of Oregon, and is it Seattle?
Yeah, where they're taking off.
Yes.
Let's say, to give you a short list, it's Portland, it's Vancouver, British Columbia, Austin, Texas, and now Los Angeles.
I know that North Carolina, and even Greensboro itself, I know that we are growing. So is that maybe why the introduction to us? It just seems, you keep saying it's very expensive with all of these restrictions, so I haven't seen a reason to embrace it yet.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't either if I were here. Honestly, I wouldn't. That's what I'm saying. It's like, from an advocacy point of view, if you are interested in the social benefits of ADUs, then the thing to work on here would be changing the codes. Because right now, the codes are such that I wouldn't want to build them either because of the owner occupancy requirement. If there wasn't an owner occupancy requirement, then I might consider it. So I think, So, I mean, that's kind of where I stand. Now, the reason that they do make sense is if you can deal with the owner occupancy requirement and you're not, it's because it pays for itself in a certain number of years, say 10 years. So if you're, say you're 50 years old and you're gonna develop an ADU and you're gonna own that property till the day you die, till you're 80, then it makes a lot of sense, Because then all of a sudden, for 10 years, maybe you're paying off that debt, but after 10 years, you can move into the ADU because you don't need a big house anymore, and all of a sudden, you're set for life financially, because your rental income is covering all of your mortgage and then some.
So you are strictly ADUs and no tiny houses?
Yeah, I mean, I deal with both, so we can talk about both, but this talk is about tiny, it's about ADUs, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
If I could just maybe throw one little piece of information in. We did have a meeting earlier today with city planning and development staff, talking a lot about coding issues that you've heard this evening. I would say there's a strong interest on the part, at least of the staff, and I'm sure boards and commissions are going to get into this conversation. There's been a lot of work done lately with the Housing in Our Community Task Force, looking at ways to adjust some of our housing policies and codes. And so I think there's interest in working on the coding issues to make it more of an incentive and more of a financial incentive to look at this kind of a concept. It's a long game. It's going to take months, maybe years to really get to where this kind of a development program makes sense. But I think there's some pretty strong interest here to work on it.
Thank you.
I was just gonna ask, you made the point, and I definitely see why, that the people who are investing in building the ADUs are largely middle class or the kind of people who can get that much money together. Who are the people who are renting them? Because I'm thinking about what this would mean in Greensboro. It seems to me that we need affordable housing more than we just need housing to have housing.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty curious about in the places where it's taken off, in
Who
practice,
is it
who have those
serving?
people been, and have they been like lower income?
Yeah, so I'd say it's a good question. So there's a lot of interest in, can ADUs be the panacea for affordable housing? The answer is no, but couple of really interesting notable facts about ADUs. Number one, they are naturally affordable housing in that if you compare an accessory dwelling unit to its adjacent neighbors, it will be cheaper than any of those neighboring properties because all those neighboring properties are 2,000 square foot homes. So it's a one-bedroom unit in that same neighborhood, so therefore it'll be cheaper. So it's more like adding an apartment unit that is not within an apartment building complex. So it's more like serving whoever would rent an apartment. Who is that? I don't think you could say it's like, Section 8 affordable housing per se, but it's, it's whatever that demographic is. That's the demographic. But the other interesting facet of ADUs is 10% of ADUs from 3 different studies now have shown that 10% of ADUs are rented out at $0 per month. Who are they rented out to? Family and friends, basically. Mostly like mother, aging parents who are helping to take care of their kids. So, and then 20% of them from 3 different studies roughly 20% are rented out at significantly below market value. And that's probably, I'm guessing, generous landlords, or maybe they're renting out to friends at that rate. So those are unregulated forms of, housing that is comparable to, subsidized affordable housing. So, so without any regulatory oversight whatsoever, it just seems as though 20% are being used at far below market rates. So, you can't bank on that, but you can take 3 independent studies and say, well, maybe that'll happen here too, and just hope and pray that, it does. But that's what we've seen to date. So it's really just the same person who would be serving the same type of person who would be otherwise renting a one-bedroom unit anywhere else.
Have you ever heard of a city that has an annual inspection requirement, so make sure it's being used as intended?
No, thank goodness.
I think, well, might help with the concern raised by the gentleman earlier.
What was the concern?
Over here.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, anything like that.
Since you know tiny houses too, would you explain, why could you not just take a tiny house,
Drop the wheels.
drop the wheels, meet the local code for
Yeah.
ADUs and use that?
Well, I normally say it's impossible to do for a variety of reasons, but today I went to a tiny house that was 180 square feet, smallest tiny house I've ever seen, smallest legal permitted, residentially built home with 180 square feet. So it can be done, but it gets pretty like wonky quickly, but it has to do with meeting the IRC building code issues. So, for example, our tiny houses on wheels have sleeping lofts. Sleeping lofts have ladders that get to them, because you can't fit in a full code 3-foot wide staircase that has a rise and run. And then when you get up to the sleeping loft, there's the requisite 6 foot 8 inches of headroom over 70 square feet, which is the minimum building size. Therefore, there isn't sufficient room to have a legal bedroom, because tiny houses are otherwise too big. So there's no way to do a bedroom in a tiny house on wheels. Therefore, if you were to take the wheels off, you still wouldn't have a legal bedroom. And then there's a host of other building codes that you wouldn't be able to meet on a tiny house on wheels. Tiny houses on wheels are designed to be on a trailer. They're, on a trailer, like a flatbed trailer. And so they're, by code, going to be limited to 8.5 feet of width due to the road width requirements. And as a result of that, you want to put in 2x4 wall construction as opposed to 2x6 construction. And as a result of that, you can't fit in sufficient insulation to meet the residential building code standards, whereas with 2x6 construction, you can. I mean, you can meet the building insulation requirements with 2x4 insulation, but you'd have to think in advance about how to do it and put in extra insulation. So if it were so simple, that would be nice, but it's not. Tiny houses on wheels, just for everybody's reference, are like significantly less expensive than ADUs. We're talking like $15,000 for the parts and maybe $30,000 for everything if you're going to buy it, like finished. Whereas an ADU, the starting point in this area would probably be like $100,000. So just the starting point would probably go up from there, I'm guessing. So tiny houses are very compelling for for similar reasons, but they're very small and very nichey in terms of the kind of person who would want to live in it, and they're not legal to live in, and there's no kind of true standards by which you can develop them at this point, and there's no inspections for them. You can't insure them, you can't finance them, so there's all these kind of drawbacks of tiny houses on wheels. But they're cool, and there's certainly a lot of entrepreneurs who are thinking about kind of interesting ways to create prefabricated modular construction that can ship in and drop off, but for a variety of reasons, those business models aren't really working yet. So right now, the way that ADU development happens is custom design, custom one-off construction, generally speaking.
Hey there. So I also live in the College Hill Historic District, and I resonate as I was listening to your question. I think one of the things that, just to respond to you, that makes looking at ADUs for us at this time particularly exciting is a couple of things. We're looking at walkability, livability, the ability to live in an age-in-place type of property. Our state president with AARP lives in College Hill, so these are some of the things we're actively looking at. And my understanding, and Dan, if you will, and Mike Cowgate, I see you over there, Mississippi. If you'll weigh in on this in a moment, that'd be great. But I think what's going to protect us as we look at ADUs and the ability to add them, the openness of adding them to College Hill, for example, is they're going to have to go through an approval process, and I think they're going to have to go through Historic Preservation Commission approval, correct, Mike? Yeah.
Historic district would be an ideal place for ADUs because of that design review, I think, that would add a layer of protection that I think people would really appreciate.
Yeah. So ideally, they're gonna be charming, they're gonna hopefully be, they can be modern, but they can look historic. So it gives again, the homeowner an opportunity to do something that's going to really add to the neighborhood feel and enhance that, hopefully. So it made me think, though, as we're talking about this, because, as you mentioned, we do have older properties that before the redevelopment commission got involved in our historic districts and were actively overseeing the properties and their management and how they were being changed. My house, for example, was built in 1894. At one point, it had multiple apartments in it and kitchens and bathrooms where they should not be, multiple entrances. That our home was one that redevelopment took a hold of. They sold it, and with the new owner's commitment to restoring the single-family usage, thank goodness. So we're there. But it did make me think, while we're on this note, for properties that are rented, that are existing, like some of those houses that are all cut up, my understanding is that rental unit code of occupancy, the ROCO laws should apply, right, Mike? So on that note, as we're looking at the code and ADU code, is that one of the things, and I think I'm asking a question that was sort of asked a minute ago, is that going to be part of the code as well? And I guess as a realtor, I'm thinking about safety as we look at these ADUs. Do you want to make sure you have things that are included, like a carbon monoxide detector and a fire alarm, those sorts of things? Is that part of what we're talking about with our code? Does that make sense?
I think basic answer is they have to meet the state building code, just like any other construction project, right? The development code deals with, where you put it and, how big it is.